Good evening, and welcome back to the Quiet Pantheon. I'm glad you're here again. Before we begin, settle in. Let yourself grow comfortable and still. Feel the weight of your body sinking down, growing heavier and warmer. Let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw soften. And let your breathing slow, all on its own. In. And gently out. In. And slowly out. There is nothing you need to do now. Nowhere you need to be. Nothing left to carry, or solve, or finish. Tonight, we simply continue our quiet story. You do not need to remember what came before. You do not need to follow every word. My voice is only here to walk beside you softly as you drift down toward sleep. Tonight, we return to the story of Thomas Aquinas, the quiet young man who gave away a life of wealth and rank and power to walk instead the road of empty hands. You may remember the shape of it. He was born into a noble family in a stone castle in the warm hills of southern Italy. He was raised in an ancient mountain monastery and meant one day to become its abbot, a great and wealthy lord of the church. But in the busy seaport of Naples as a young man, he found two things that changed everything. The deep ideas of the philosopher Aristotle, and the simple, poor, searching life of the wandering friars called the Dominicans. And so he had made his choice. He had given away the bright future his family had built for him. He had chosen poverty and empty hands and the single endless question he had carried since he was a small boy: what is God? His family was horrified, and they had decided to act. That is where we left him. And that is where tonight we begin again. The friars knew that the family was angry. They knew that a powerful house, wounded in its pride, might do something rash. And so they thought it wise to send Thomas away. Far away to the north. Across the mountains to the great city of Paris, the very heart of learning in all of Europe. There they hoped he could study in peace, safely beyond the reach of his family. And so a small group of friars set out. On foot, along the old roads, with young Thomas walking among them. Imagine that journey. The dusty roads winding through the hills, the long days of walking, the simple meals, and the nights spent resting wherever they could. Moving slowly north, away from the family lands, toward a new and quiet life. But the family had learned of the plan. His mother, Theodora, was a woman of strong will. And she did not intend to let her younger son simply vanish into the north, into poverty, into a life she saw as a disgrace. She sent word ahead. Word to her older sons, Thomas's brothers. Hard men, soldiers, men of action and of horses and of swords. And they rode out to find him. Somewhere on the open road, in the quiet country, they came upon the little band of friars walking. Picture it. The sudden sound of hooves growing louder. The riders appearing, the dust. His own brothers armed, surrounding the small group of poor and unarmed friars. There was nothing the friars could do. And so the brothers took Thomas by force. They pulled him away from his companions, and they carried him back south, back toward the family lands, back toward the very castle where he had been born. The journey north, toward freedom and study, was over before it had truly begun. And there, in the family's strongholds, they kept him, a prisoner, in his own family's home. Now, it was not a dungeon. He was a son of the house, not a common captive. He was not chained or starved or thrown into some dark cell. But he was watched, confined, kept within the walls and not permitted to leave. His family hoped that, given enough time, his strange new resolve would soften, that he would grow tired or lonely or discouraged, that he would at last come to his senses and give up this mad idea and return to the future they had chosen for him. And this captivity lasted a long while. By most accounts, about a year. A whole year. Held within those familiar stone walls, the very rooms, perhaps, where he had played as a small child. A year of his family's pleading and arguing and pressure. His mother came to speak with him. His brothers came to speak with him. They tried persuasion. They tried reason. They tried anger. They reminded him of his duty, of the family's name, of all that he was throwing away. They tried, it seems, almost everything they could think of. And through it all, Thomas remained quiet and calm and utterly, gently immovable. There is a famous story told of this year. It is one of the best-known tales of his whole life. And whether every detail is exactly true, it tells us something real about the kind of man he was. His brothers, it is said, grew desperate. Their words had not moved him. Their anger had not moved him. And so they decided to try something darker. They wished to break his vow, to shatter his commitment to a life of purity and study and prayer. And so, the story goes, they sent into his room a young woman, beautiful, and meant to tempt him away from the path he had chosen. And what did Thomas do? He rose. He went to the fire that burned in the room, and he took from it a burning brand, a piece of wood, glowing and smoking at the end. And with it calmly, he drove the temptation from the room. The door closed, and he was alone again. And then, it is said, with that same piece of charred and blackened wood, he traced upon the wall the sign of the cross. And he returned to his quiet, to his stillness, to his thoughts and his prayers. Whatever truly happened in that room, so long ago, the meaning of the story is clear. Thomas would not be moved. Not by argument, not by anger, not by loneliness, not by temptation. His certainty was soft in its manner. He did not shout or rage or fight. But beneath that gentleness, his will was made of stone. And so the long year wore slowly on. You may hold a river still for a time by building a wall across it. But the water does not stop wishing to flow. It only waits. It gathers quietly behind the wall. And in the end, it finds its way. And Thomas, in his captivity, was like that river. He did not rage against the wall. He did not despair. He simply waited. Quiet and patient and certain. And it is said that he did not waste that year at all. Far from it. He could not walk the roads, or preach, or study at the great universities. So he turned his prison into a place of learning. He read. He thought. He is said to have studied great works of philosophy and theology there in his confinement, to have committed vast portions of Scripture to memory. His body was held within the walls, but his mind ranged freely, as it always would, across the widest fields of thought. And slowly, slowly, the family began to understand. His was not a passing fancy. This was not the brief rebellion of a restless young man, soon to fade. This was who Thomas was. All the way down. They could hold him for a year. They could hold him for 10 years. And still, when they opened the door, they would find the same quiet, certain soul, with the same single question in his heart. At last, the family's resistance broke. Perhaps they simply grew weary. Perhaps they saw, finally, that they could not win, and that to keep fighting would only shame them further. His mother, it seems, came at last to accept what she could not change. And one day the watch was lifted. The doors were opened. In some tellings, his sisters helped him slip quietly away. In others, he was simply, finally, allowed to go. However it happened, the captive year came to its end. Thomas was free. And free now, with his family's long resistance finally spent, he could return to the friars. To the road, to the future he had chosen, and never, for a single moment, let go of. And so, once more, he set out toward the north. Toward learning, toward the great cities of thought. This time no riders came to stop him. No brothers appeared upon the road. The way was open at last. He went first to Paris. That vast, crowded, brilliant centre of study where scholars came from every land. And then onward, further still, to the city of Cologne, in the German lands to the north and east. For there, in Cologne, was a teacher. And not just any teacher. He was, by many accounts, the greatest scholar of the entire age. A man whose mind ranged across all of creation. The movement of the stars, the nature of stones and metals and minerals, the lives of plants and animals, the workings of the human body, and the deepest questions of the soul. He studied everything. He was curious about everything. His name was Albert. And in time, the world would call him Albert the Great. Albert was a Dominican, like Thomas. And he was perhaps the only man in all of Europe who had truly grasped the vast new world of Aristotle's ideas. The very ideas that had so thrilled young Thomas back in Naples. To study under Albert was to sit at the feet of the most learned man alive. And so Thomas came to Cologne and joined the circle of Albert's students and began quietly to learn. And now we come to one of the gentlest and most beloved stories of his whole life. For when Thomas arrived among the other students, they did not see a great mind. Not at all. What they saw was a very large, very heavy young man. Quiet, slow to speak, he almost never offered an opinion in their debates. He would sit and listen and say little or nothing at all. And so the other students, in the careless and unkind way of the young, gave him a nickname. They called him the Dumb Ox. The Dumb Ox. A big, silent, heavy creature. Slow, they thought, perhaps a little simple. He was so large and so quiet that surely they reasoned there could not be very much happening behind those calm, watchful eyes. How wrong they were! How completely, how wonderfully wrong! For behind that silence lay one of the most powerful minds the world has ever known. He simply felt no need to display it. He did not speak in order to be admired. He listened first, and he spoke only when he had something worth saying. There is a story that one kind student took pity on the silent ox. Thinking that Thomas was struggling to keep up with the difficult lessons, he offered to help him, to go over the material with him, gently, and explain the hard parts. And Thomas, humble as ever, gratefully accepted. But as the student tried to teach him, they came to a passage so difficult that the helper himself became confused. He lost the thread of it. He could not go on. And quietly, gently, so as not to embarrass him, Thomas explained it. Not only that passage, but the whole difficult matter, more deeply and more clearly than the other student had ever understood it himself. The young man was astonished. The ox, it turned out, was no ox at all. And then came the moment when the truth could no longer stay hidden. In those days, students would write and debate and defend their reasoning before the teacher and the class. And one of Thomas's writings, one of his careful arguments, came at last into the hands of Albert himself, the master. And Albert read it. And Albert understood at once what all the other students had missed entirely. That this silent, heavy, humble young man held within him a mind of extraordinary depth. A mind of rare and quiet power. A mind perhaps greater than his own. And it is said that Albert then spoke words that have echoed down through the centuries, all the way to us, here tonight. Standing before the very students who had mocked Thomas as a dumb ox, the great teacher said, in effect, "You call him the dumb ox. But I tell you this, that this ox will one day bellow so loudly that his bellowing will fill the whole world." And he was right. More right, perhaps, than even he could have known. For the quiet young man, the captive who would not be moved, the silent student they had laughed at, was about to begin his true work. The work of a lifetime. The great and patient attempt to weave together reason and faith, the mind and the soul, Aristotle and Scripture. To build, out of careful thought, a vast cathedral of understanding. The ox was about to bellow. But that is a story for another night. For now, let us leave Thomas there, in Cologne, at the side of his great teacher. No longer a captive, no longer mocked. Simply a quiet man, with empty hands and an endless question, and a mind like a slow and rising tide. Finally free, finally home in the world of thought he was born for, about to begin. So let it rest there for tonight. Let the long road north grow soft and far away. Let the walls of the castle and the dust of the journey and the voices of the laughing students all grow quiet and dim and distant. There is nothing more for you to do now. Nothing to remember, nothing to carry. Only to breathe, slow and soft and easy. And to rest. And to drift. Thank you for spending this quiet hour here in the quiet Pantheon. Whenever you are ready, the story of Thomas and his great bellowing will be waiting, warm and dim and patient, to continue. But not now. Now, there is only rest. Sleep well. Sleep deeply. And good night.